What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today we are looking at another magic card. This one not as random as usual, and it's going out to my buddy Veritas, who's actually in my play group. We jam some Commander each week, and this past week he actually busted out Daghatar, the Adamant, which is a card that, to be honest, I had never seen before. And so we're going to go ahead and take a deeper look at this guy and see what he's all about and how he can operate. Okay, so Daghatar, the Adamant is a 0/0 for 4 with Vigilance. Phenomenal rate, let me tell you what. And he's a human warrior. Now, Daghatar, the Adamant enters the battlefield with 4+1/+1 counters on it. Okay, so he's not a true 0/0, which is good because those kind of die immediately. Then you can pay 1 hybrid Golgari, move a +1/+1 counter from target creature onto a second target creature. So for 3 mana, you can just move counters around. That's pretty neat. You know, you can do something with that. Now, 3 mana is a lot to move a single counter, so that is definitely concerning. There's something that there's a bit of an issue there. Although I would like to point out cards like Hardened Scales and Doubling Season that whenever a +1/+1 counter is placed on a creature, you put 2 of them on instead. Any situation where you're doubling the number of counters that come onto something, simply moving a counter back and forth is placing a new counter on the permanents as you're doing it. And so if you have a Doubling Season down and a Daghatar, you can pay 3, remove a +1/+1 counter from any creature that you have. Could be Daghatar himself because he comes in with 4, and then you can put 2 on whatever other creature you have. So that's pretty darn slick. You know, you can do something with that. Also, I'd like to point out that he works really, really well with cards like the Ozolith, just because when you have those +1/+1 counters, they once you have the Ozolith down, they just never go away. So Daghatar is a really solid commander. Now, I specifically say commander because he's a legendary human warrior, and he has access to 3 different colors within his color identity. So he himself is a white creature, but he has a black and green activation cost. So what you can do is you can actually put Daghatar at the head of a deck that's focused on those counters, so you can have a lot of proliferate synergies. You can have the Ozolith, of course, that's just kind of a no-brainer in that situation, plus Hardened Scales, plus things like Hydra's Growth that can just create an obscene number of counters very, very quickly. And then I would also consider putting things like one card that comes to mind is Power Conduit, although I'm trying to remember if you can only put that on artifact creatures. I think you might. Anyway, doesn't matter. The truth is, this guy does a lot of really great things. Now, is that strategy that great? You know, this is what I would call a fair commander. If you want to play with counters and you have a big old dice bag and you really want to just like move them around and see things get huge, this guy's great. You can do a lot of cool things with him, and so that's not nothing. But the fact that you're getting a 4/4 vigilance for 4, you know, that's not good. And then if you want to use the abilities, if you don't have another counter generator in play of some kind, you're going to be having to weaken your commander in order to buff another creature up. That's a real feel bad. So if you don't, I mean, with this, you would need counter doublers. If you don't have counter doublers, don't run Daghatar. To be honest, I don't remember if my buddy V had counter doublers in his deck. I believe he did. Yeah, I think that's really where he's going to shine. The other thing about this though is it is vulnerable to board wipes. So that's where the Ozolith comes in. That's a very helpful tool for that. But that's not the only one. You know, you've got to do something to help with this. And there is one card that I do happen to know is in my buddy V's deck called Inspiring Call. And what that does is it's 2 and a green, and you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, and then all creatures that you control with +1/+1 counters, all of them gain indestructible, and I think you draw cards for each of them or something like that. Like, it's actually a really, really good way to prevent a Wrath style effect if you have a lot of counters on your stuff. So that's wonderful, and that's something you can definitely take advantage of here. Also, I feel like the fact that he's in Abzan colors, so he's black, green, and white, which you can do a lot of fun stuff with. I personally associate Abzan with graveyard shenanigans, just general graveyard tomfoolery, if you will. And he doesn't really telegraph that. From a deck builder's perspective, when you look at them, you don't really see graveyard action. However, you certainly could have graveyard action. There's no reason you couldn't. Cards like Triskelion that leverage counters in cool ways and turn it into direct damage, you can definitely leverage that with. I say Triskelion specifically rather than Walking Ballista because with Triskelion you could reanimate it, and it comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters on it regardless. Now it does cost 6, so you're getting a 3/3 for 6 that can deal direct damage, which when it was first printed back in I think Alpha, it was great. Now not so much. Walking Ballista is kind of the fixed version or the power crept version of Triskelion. And so nowadays, 99% of the time, Walking Ballista is better. However, there is that one instance when you really want a Triskelion, and if you are reanimating it out of your graveyard, Triskelion is the correct answer. And so if you're going to be leveraging that aspect of these colors, that's one way to do it and still get counters on your stuff. Although, that is a general issue with creatures that come into play with counters. A lot of them come into play with counters based on their casting cost. If you think of all the Hydras in green, a lot of them have X in their casting cost, and they come into play with X counters on it. If you reanimate them, that X is 0. And so if their base stats are 0/0, so actually let's just take a look at Daghatar himself, because so he comes in as a 0/0 with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Now you can reanimate him, bring him in with 4 counters. So never mind. He's actually a terrible example for this point. I apologize. Like I say on the show, it's late. But that's not anyway. So if you take like a Voracious Hydra, it's a 0/1 that comes into play with X counters on it. And if I'm not mistaken, it's green, and X. So I don't remember if it's 1 green or 2. I think it's 2. Could be wrong. Doesn't matter. Now I'm second guessing myself. I think it's 1. Regardless, Voracious Hydra. It's got X in the mana cost. You play it for whatever you need on your curve. But if you reanimate it, now granted, as a reanimation target, it only costs 0. So it only costs 1 or 2. So that's nice. You could like unearth it. However, what do you get? You get a 0/1 that does nothing. It's pretty lousy. Then in the case of something like Hydroid Krasis or Stonecoil Serpent, it would come back as a straight up 0/0 and just die immediately. Now, if you need a death trigger for something, that'll work. But that's a really specific instance. So in general, I don't think reanimation makes a lot of sense if you're really leaning into the +1/+1 counters. Now, cards that can get creatures out of your graveyard, that's something. The other thing that I would keep in mind is all of those big X cost creatures have very low converted mana costs. So if you have an ability that something like Fiend Artisan that lets you, actually never mind, that goes straight into play, but cards that allow you to search up creatures with a certain converted mana cost and put them into your hand, those can be incredibly valuable because you can search for something that costs 1, put it into your hand, and then all of a sudden you can play it for 10 or whatever. Also, fun fact, it doesn't necessarily work here because you couldn't put it in a Daghatar deck, but I'd also like to point out all of those cards with those crazy low converted mana costs, but with a big ol' X in them, all of those fit under Luris's Companion Clause. So there's nothing stopping you from running a Luris deck full of Hydras, with Luris in your Companion Zone. Just saying. And that's kind of fun. I think I need to build that now. Anyway, so that's going to be my next brew on Arena. But back to Daghatar. I mean, he's over here. Sorry. So back to Daghatar. He does have Vigilance. Now, that's nice. The other thing I can't help but notice, he's a human, which means you can't mutate on top of him, which is one thing that I love doing with counters. Because these 0/0 bases, when you mutate a creature on top of them, all the counters, so the power and toughness persist. And you get a new base power and toughness. So if you mutate like an Aluna onto this thing, all of a sudden you would get a 10/10, but you can't because he's a human. So that kind of stinks. But that just sort of is what it is. So, I mean, what other things can we do with counters, though? Let's think about that. I would look at cards that have specific counter synergies. That's really what we're going for. And I guess maybe I'm tapped on this guy because I think he's got green he has access to green. I would definitely lean into Hydras. Cost reduction is generally pretty darn good when you're working with that. Green and black, you have access to card draw. In general, I think Abzan is a really powerful color combination that is just downright fantastic. Now, is Daghatar the best Abzan commander out there? Absolutely not. But what you do have here is a unique Abzan commander, and that is not nothing. In fact, I think that should be applauded because a lot of the Abzan commanders out there, they do grave synergies, they do, creature destruction and life gain stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those are fine. But at the end of the day, a +1/+1 counter theme coming from Abzan, and +1/+1 counters are no stranger to green, they're no stranger to white. Black has them a little bit, I guess. It's not unheard of for black to have those. I mean, every color can have them, but it's just, green and white have a lot of them, and so it makes sense. It makes sense, but it's still unique enough so that I think it deserves a little bit of a shout out and some appreciation. So, I don't know. I think this guy's interesting. And now I petered out of gas on this one pretty darn hard, and I'm feeling like maybe I need to do a little bit of research and see what other synergies are out there, because it seems kind of lame to just be like, the Ozolith and Hardened Scales. Cool, right? We did it. But maybe that's the answer. At the end of the day, those are the best. Those are fantastic, so there's nothing wrong with it. Anyway, thanks so much for hanging out. I appreciate you. You can catch me over on Twitch, twitch.tv/hamhocks42. You can get this podcast anywhere fine podcasts are sold, or on YouTube, where I'm also posting other videos as well. So yeah, if you enjoy this, I look forward to catching you in those other places as well, and have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you next time.